On today's Community Wednesday, let's break down the Modern Warfare AK-47 with the 5.45 ammo conversion. In a previous video, I've talked about the Modern Warfare AK-47 and given you two builds that are pretty decent. So if those were viable, is this ammo conversion pretty decent to use as well? We'll find out by breaking down its stats, but first, let's talk about the build. We'll be using the monolithic suppressor, no stock, 545 by 39mm 30 round mags of course, stippled grip tape, and sleight of hand. While you may be a bit confused with the choice of these attachments, it'll all make sense when we get into the stats. So let's get into the stats, starting with mobility. Its ADS time is 220 milliseconds, which is exactly what we need for a close quarters viable weapon. Its reload and reload at times are 2.13 seconds from empty and 1.5 if you leave one bullet in the mag. And its mag cap is 30. And this is the reason we're using sleight of hand. While it still has a pretty decent reload time without sleight of hand, most weapons that are specializing in close quarters have a reload time in the green, and without it, it would be in the yellow. Its movement and sprint speeds are pretty great, and its movement is actually a tiny bit better than its Cold War counterpart. However, as good as the sprint speed is, it won't be able to catch up to any Cold War SMG or even the Cold War AK. And its ADS strafe speed is 2.18 meters per second, which is fast for a Modern Warfare assault rifle, but not fast enough to be competing against SMGs. Sprint out and attack sprint out time is 220 and 320 milliseconds, which again, is decent, but not good enough to compete against most SMGs. I didn't include the 5mW laser because you shouldn't be hip firing with this build. Your ADS time matches your sprint out time. This means you should be pulling the trigger as you're aiming down your sights, and its stability is extremely bad at 3T. But again, this is a close quarters weapon, so it doesn't matter too much. Its bullet velocity is 666.7 meters per second, which is pretty fast for a close range weapon. And lastly, its rate of fire is 11.1 rounds per second, or 660 rounds per minute. So it gets a mobility score of 35. Its recoil is quite a lot. It has a lot of side-to-side bounce, and that initial curve to the right makes it very hard to control. This is why it can only be controlled up to 32 meters. But this isn't the worst thing, and once we get to the damage section, you'll see why. So it gets a recoil score of 30. For its damage, it has a drop off at 19 meters and then once again at 28. This build originally had the Spetsnaz barrel, which gave it a few extra meters, but it hurt its mobility way too much. But when we compare it to SMGs, it doesn't matter if we have our first drop off at 19 meters or 23 meters. Because by the time we're entering our first damage drop off, the SMG is already entering its second or third. So in this first damage range, we get a great headshot and upper torso TTK, while getting average lower torso and limb TTKs. In the second damage range, we're getting an above average headshot TTK, a below average upper torso TTK, and pretty bad lower torso and limb TTKs. And in the third damage range, it is below average for all damaged areas. If you get one headshot in the mix, it's possible to reduce your shots to kill by 1, but you will have to get 5 upper torso shots in the second and third damage ranges, which will be extremely hard due to its recoil. But it should be no surprise that this weapon's strength lies in its first damage range, and the fact that it extends to 19 meters is pretty amazing. You'll be able to beat many close range weapons. In order to beat something like the OTS-9, you have to get those upper torso and head shots. If you're mostly getting lower torso and limb shots, you're not going to be beating it. So it gets a damage score of 53.44. And when we add up all the categories, it gets a final score of 118.44. This build has surprisingly good mobility and damage, and it can definitely serve you well. It's one of the only assault rifles that can still compete in close range after this new meta that we have. However, a few of you may know that there's another assault rifle that is extremely great at close range, and that is the AS VAL. So is it even worth considering the Modern Warfare 5.45 conversion when we have the AS VAL? Well, let's look at the stats and find out. Here are the AK stats once again, and here are the AS VALs. Starting with mobility, the AS VAL has a better ADS time, ADS strafe speed, stability, and rate of fire. The Modern Warfare AK has a better reload time, movement and sprint speeds, and velocity. And trying to pick between the two in this category is a bit difficult. Would you rather have a snappier, more forgiving weapon that is a bit slower, or would you rather have a faster moving weapon that is less forgiving? In the recoil department, the AK-47 does get a few more meters of range. Its more vertical nature does make it easier to control, while the AS VAL is pretty violent. But what good is that AK-47's recoil when you really shouldn't be using it past 19 meters anyways? Once we get to damage though, the comparison's kind of over. While both weapons have the same color values in the first damage range, the AS VAL does have an advantage in every single location, not to mention an extremely greater advantage in its upper torso. However, the AS VAL's first damage range extends all the way up to 32 meters, and past 32 meters, it has the potential to get above average and average TTKs, although this is unlikely due to its recoil. There is no situation in which the AK-47 can come out on top. The AS VAL is just way too good at what it is, and the AK-47 with the 545 conversion is just technically a bad AS VAL. Sure, with a longer barrel, you could definitely extend your first damage range from 19 meters to 27 meters, but at that point, your ADS time is going to be extremely bad, and your movement speed is just not going to be anywhere near competitive. Could you just sit and hold an angle then? Yeah, but why not just use an MG82 at that point? Does this make the AK-47 with the 545 conversion a bad weapon though? No, it's still pretty usable, and its stats are good enough. Just be aware that the AS VAL exists though, and it's superior in almost every way, so don't be surprised if you lose to it. And lastly, why didn't I build this AK for longer ranges? And the simple answer is its long range TTK is not really special enough to be considered. Its recoil isn't that great either, and its close range TTK is just begging for it to be used as a close range weapon. Basically, if we were to stack this with all the long range attachments and recoil reduction attachments, it would have LMG level movement, ADS time, and even then, its TTK, due to its bullet velocity potential, wouldn't be anywhere near as good as an average assault rifle, like something like the Grau or the EM2. So while you technically could, you definitely shouldn't, because this weapon was not designed to be used this way, and you can refer to one of my Warzone science videos in order to figure out why this is a bad idea. But that's the AK-47 with that 545 conversion. Have you used it recently or ever? Let me know in the comments down below. And as always, if there's any weapon, build, or part of the game you want to break down, let me know when we see it on the next Community Wednesday. But that's the video. If you enjoyed it or it helped you in any way, let me know by leaving a like. If you got any questions or comments, leave me down in the comment section down below, and if you want to make sure that you never miss another video, be sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching.